going on, y'all? It is getting to be about that time. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, it's starting to get warm. And especially down here in the South and the Southeast, it's already consistently in the 80s here in South Carolina. The water is warm. More often than not, fish are already post-spawn. So topwater is a big player. And one of my favorite topwater techniques is a hollow body frog. So today I kind of want to talk to you about frog fishing in general, as far as rod, reel, line, the gear you need to get started, types of frogs, colors, why I choose certain colors over others, why I choose certain styles over others, where I fish them, how I fish them, different types of frogs. And at the end, kind of go over some, I guess, tips and tricks that you can use to hopefully improve your frog fishing game and get more fish to the boat. So we'll start off, like I said, with the equipment you need, the rod, the reel, and the line. So again, when I'm fishing a frog, I'm typically fishing or targeting duckweed mats, weed lines. I'm throwing it up onto the bank if possible and bringing it into the water. So I'm generally fishing around some heavier stuff. You know, like I said, those weeds, whatever, so on and so forth. So I want something with a lot of power. So I'm going to throw a heavy power rod. This just happens to be a 7.4 heavy Savage Gear rod. Like I said, I'm throwing it around some nasty stuff. So I want a rod with a lot of power that when I set the hook, it's driving those hooks into that fish's mouth, but it's also helping me pull that fish away from whatever cover it's in or around right away. Now with that, because I'm throwing a heavy rod, I need heavy line. Heavy rod, heavy cover, heavy line. So I'm throwing braid. I've found that for me, 50-pound braid is kind of the best all around. I think 30 pounds is a little too light for fishing around that kind of stuff, but 65 pounds is a little overkill, at least for me. Maybe if you're like in South Florida and you're fishing heavy milfoil, grass, whatever, and they're bigger fish and they're digging themselves down into that stuff, 65 pounds might be the norm. But for where I'm at, what I'm fishing, 50 pounds seems to be a happy medium between spool capacity, castability, strength, the whole 9 yards. 50 pounds is kind of my standard when I'm looking at line for frog fishing. As far as the reel goes, I tend to pick up the fastest reel that I can get. This happens to be a Shimano Curado in an 8.5-to-1 gear ratio. I like that faster reel because, again, I'm targeting specific or casting to specific targets. So I want to be able to work that frog in that specific area and then crank that frog back in as quickly as possible to make another cast to another area or repeat the same cast that I just made if a frog or a fish happened to miss my frog. So I want to be able to take up that line as quickly as possible. And again, kind of going back to part of my reasoning for a heavy power rod, I want to be able to pull that fish away and out of whatever that fish was in so that he doesn't get me wrapped around stumps, twigs, whatever, or get me bogged down in those duckweed mats, grass, whatever the case is. I want to be able to pull them away from that as quickly as possible. Can you get away with lighter stuff and slower reels? Sure. But again, it's all kind of dependent on where you're fishing, how you're fishing, what kind of cover you're fishing. So if you don't have the real deep grass or the real thick grass that comes up right up underneath the surface of the water, where you're not throwing up onto the bank and duckweed mats, things like that, a medium heavy could work. And throwing it on 30-pound braid or, even heavy monofilament might work. I know there's lots of people that fish frogs on mono. To me, it's a foreign concept. I just don't trust it enough. So I just stick with the braid all the time. Now we'll talk about some frogs as far as styles of frogs, colors, and why I fish them and where I fish them, how I choose which ones I'm gonna pick up and why. So your, I guess, standard frog is one that looks like this. It's a typical walking frog, right? It's got the cone-shaped nose, rounded belly. These are your standard walking frogs. As far as color choices, I kind of keep them relatively simple. I go with 3 basic colors if possible, or I guess patterns. So I'm going to go with something with a white or a real light belly. I like this one because it does have that little bit of red just to give them something else to target. But a white belly, a black frog, or something with a bright belly like a yellow or an orange. And I guess part of the reason I choose those colors, or where I'm going to throw those colors, is for the white, I'm going to throw that in sunny conditions or when the water is a little bit clearer and cleaner. The black, I'm going to throw in low light conditions, either early morning or as the sun is dipping down. And for the yellow, I'm going to throw that when the water is, it might be sunny out, but the water's real dirty or murky, stained. It's not quite mud yet, but there's definitely a lot of color to it. I'm going to throw that yellow. That, again, that black, if it's chocolate water, I'm going to throw that black one. So those are your walking frogs. Then another style you have are your popping frogs. Here's another Spro, and as you can see, this one's taken quite a beating, caught me a lot of fish. Here's a Booyah and a Savage Gear popping frog. All of these have that cupped mouth that really put out a lot of water and have their time and place. And when I'm gonna pick up that popping frog is when there's a little bit of chop on the water, just a little bit of breeze, and there's a little bit of ripple or whatever. Then I'm gonna pick up that popping frog. I can still walk that frog just like I would with a standard walking frog. But as I'm doing so, it's gonna spit up a little bit of water, kick some water, just because of that cupped mouth. The other nice thing about these popping frogs is I can work it just like a popper. I can pause and just give it a quick pull, and it's gonna chug just like a popper would, spit up a whole bunch of water, and then I'll just kill it and let it sit there. And those fish will just absolutely come up and destroy that. So again, a popping frog, I'm gonna fish that when I'm fishing on the outside edge of some weed lines. So if I know they're not tucked up underneath the weed lines yet or underneath that duckweed mat yet, then I'll go ahead and grab that popping frog. Another option for working around those weed edges that really does well, again, when there's just a touch of chop on the water, are these guys. This is a Teckle Sprinker frog, and this is a Booyah Toad Runner. So with these guys, they've obviously got these little boot tails on them, and these things kick up a lot of water. They have a great whopper plopper style sound to them. The cool thing about the Booyah is it's got a little wire in this boot tail. You can bend it and change the angle of this boot and change kind of the sound that you get. You don't get that with the Sprinker frog, but you still get a really good plopper sound with this over the Booyah, or in addition to the Booyah. So these are another great option when there's some chop on the water, fish are real aggressive, they're chasing, they're feeding right along the edges of those weeds. The other nice thing about these is because they're a frog style, they're weedless. So typically where you wouldn't be able to drag a whopper plopper or a buzzbait across the top of some weeds as you're working it, you can do that with these. So you can throw it up onto that weed mat and rip it off real quick with a lot of splash or whatever and get that reaction bite, or you can just steady retrieve it along that weed line and get bit just as well. Another great option, and they come in different sizes, are these guys. This is a hollow body sunfish. These guys are great during and just after the bluegill spawn. Fish it around those spawning areas, and it gives those bass who are already lurking around those areas looking for those stray bluegill to eat, it gives those bass the impression that there's a dying sunfish on the surface struggling to survive, and he will come up and absolutely destroy them. Now, these aren't all that great for fishing on weed mats like you would a frog. These are more of an open water, and because of the design of these things, they walk real well, and that's kind of what they're designed for, is working around those weed edges, working in some open water, and they just absolutely get bit. So we've talked about rod, reel, line. We've talked about some different styles of frogs. We've talked about why I choose certain colors over others, and kind of the color options that I have in my box. So now we'll, I guess, talk about some modifications, some tips and tricks for modifying your frog or fishing your frog in order to make you more effective. Now, a lot of times these frogs will come with extraordinarily long legs. Why, I don't know, but the legs on these frogs will be really, really long. And so what I recommend is trimming your frog legs just a little bit. And I've done it with just about every frog that I've got in my box, trimmed them just a little bit. And there's no science to how long I make them. I just pull it out of the box and okay, yeah, right in there. That looks good. That's all. Trim those frog legs. Another thing you can do is trim one leg a little bit shorter than the other. And I did this one kind of by accident, but you can see that one leg is just a hair shorter than the other. And a lot of guys like doing that because they think it helps the frog walk a little bit better. I don't know if it does or not. I normally don't have too many issues getting a frog to walk, a standard walking frog to walk. I think at that point, it's more about the design of the actual frog than the legs themselves. But either way, trim your legs. It gives that frog a more natural, compact profile. And so instead of coming up and just grabbing the legs, that fish is going to get the whole frog in their mouth. So that's something you can do too. Where's it at? It's right here. River to Sea makes these guys. And so these are basically a plopper attachment that you can put on the back of a frog. Now this one's a Booyah Toad Runner. I just happened to lose the boot tail that was on the back of it. Backlashed on a cast real hard, and that boot tail just went flying. So I switched it out and I put one of these guys on the back. And again, it gives that great whopper plopper sound. It's a little bit big, but because it's clear, those fish really aren't keying in on this. They're seeing that bubble trail and hearing that sound, but what they're really seeing is that, and that's what they're gonna come up and grab. So that's another thing you can do to modify your frogs. Finally, another modification is just to bend those hooks up a little bit. You can see I've kind of done it with this one too. It just helps as that fish comes up and grabs that frog, collapses that body, those hooks are already pointed up towards the roof of the mouth. And so when you set that hook, it just makes it that much easier to get those hooks into that fish's mouth. Now, speaking of hook sets, my last tip for you as far as this frog fishing video goes is to wait. Be patient. Natural instinct when these fish blow up on these frogs is to set the hook right away. I know it was a big thing for me when I first started fishing a frog, and I was missing a lot. And I typically do it every season. My first few blow ups, I do the same thing. I tend to not wait long enough, and I end up missing those fish. And I'll miss a lot until I finally get myself settled down, settled into the routine of blow up, 1, 2, set the hook. And that's something that I really encourage you to practice. And there's a couple different, I guess, mental tips, tricks that you can use to force yourself to wait. Count that 1, 2 before you set the hook. Rod position a lot of times will help as well. So if you're fishing a frog, I tend to fish a frog rod tip down. But because I've learned to teach myself to just wait, fishing rod tip down doesn't seem to hurt a lot. But a lot of guys will fish rod tip up as they're fishing a frog. And what that does is, because their rod is already up here, now they have to reel down to take up slack and point their rod at the fish before they're in a proper position to set the hook. And in that time that they've reeled down, lowered their rod tip, that's that waiting period for them to set the hook. And so it's become second nature for them to do it that way. Another thing you can do is if you're fishing rod tip down, or even parallel to the ground, you know, flat instead of down, just count, or, you know, again, say the words out loud or in your head, set the hook. Say that, and that will be that time that it takes for that fish to come up, grab the frog, and a lot of times they're just grabbing the back half of it because they're swiping at it, and they'll take it down, and as they're taking it down, they'll suck it in more. And that's what you're waiting for when you're waiting to set that hook, is you're waiting for that fish to suck that frog down just a little bit more. And you saying the words, set the hook, or counting 1, 2, or lowering your rod tip and reeling down, that's that time it takes for that fish to suck that fish, or suck that frog down just a little bit more, and for you to set the hook on that fish and actually get those hooks into its mouth. So there it is, y'all. That's my video on frog fishing. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from this video. If you would, please go ahead and like and subscribe this video to the like and subscribe. It lets me know that you like this video. It lets me know that you appreciate it and you want to see some more videos like this. If you have any other tips or tricks, something else that I could maybe learn about frog fishing, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me. It really helps out a lot. And again, I appreciate all of you sticking around for this video, and we'll see you around on the next one.